I was born in Falmouth, Jamaica.
Did you come from a big family or was it small?
Yeah, large family. Family of about 11. Five brothers, no, five sisters and six brothers.
And what else did your household consist of? Were grandparents living with you or not? Or?
I was brought up by my aunt. I didn't grow up with my immediate parents. So I was brought up with my aunt, who was a teacher, along with another sister and a couple of aunts within the household. So it's like an extended family.
If you don't mind me asking, why was that?
Uh, could be mostly to do with economics.
Okay.
Because in Jamaica, if you've got a secure job, then you're able to, suffice a family better than somebody who's just living off, hard hoc employment.
Do you remember much about your childhood?
A lot,
A lot. Okay.
yes. Yes, I had a very happy childhood because I can remember from I was about 5. Something that sticks in my mind indelibly. When I was 5, we had a very severe storm in Jamaica, August 1944. I was just 5 then, and the entire district was decimated with the winds and the heavy torrential rains, and I was really frightened. So I'll never forget that.
As a 5-year-old, what did you think it was? I mean, were you comforted? Did you know?
Hmm.
Did you think it was the end or?
No, I didn't think it was the end, but it was frightening. What I thought because we've had a much milder one previous, so I had an idea what it is. It was just that this one was so severe, and our house and kitchen and bathroom and several fruit trees got damaged. So yes, there was a lot of danger, but yes, we were comforted by the older ones.
So, earlier on you said you were brought up by an aunt and another aunt, is that right?
Well, essentially by the aunt who was a teacher, but there was two aunts in the household.
Okay, so did that mean you weren't living with your other siblings, or some of them, or
Just another elderly sister.
and cousins perhaps?
Cousins, but not in the same household. In the same district, but not in the same household.
Did you still have a lot of interaction with your immediate family?
Yes, we'd go over regularly to spend time with my father and my mother, probably during school holidays or some public holidays. We would go across and spend time with them. So, yes, I know of my father and of my mother. I was quite close to my mother, even though I didn't live with them.
And what about grandparents?
Yes, my grandmother, which I forgot to mention, was part of the household. I was quite close to my grandmother because I used to run errands for my grandmother, and I used to go to the market with my grandmother. And she had a daughter who lived about 12 miles away, and once a month we'd go spend some time with them, probably a day, and come back in the evening, which is a very long walk.
Did you enjoy schooling?
Yes, my schooling was very enjoyable because I was taught in the same school as the aunt that raised me, and the school is what you'd term a church school. So I would go to church at the school. It's a Baptist church, and the school was attached to the church. So yes, my early recollection was that the school and the church was an integral part of the district, and I did enjoy my schooling. We were brought up to believe that you need to be educated to succeed, because my eldest sister, she graduated to be a teacher from the same school.
So at that age, what ambitions
Hmm.
did you have?
Well, my early ambitions were in agriculture. My aunt's ambition was for me to be a teacher, but from very early on, I was very strong-willed, and teaching didn't attract me. I tried to get into agriculture, but unfortunately, I didn't get in. I wanted to go in through a scholarship facility that I had in the country, but I didn't get in, so I had to try something else.
What What sort of age would that have been?
That would be around 16, 17. Yes. In those days, you'd leave school at 15, and if you're very academically oriented, then you could take some extra lessons and take the Jamaica local exams, which could enable you to get into a secondary school or some other colleges.
So you were unsuccessful with your choice in agriculture, the scholarship. So what happened after that?
Well, I did extra exams, and I took the Jamaica local exams, and I was successful in doing both the first year, the second year, and the third year. So in terms of my educational abilities, I was reasonably articulate. So I was able to get a job as a chemist with one of the local sugarcane factories in the parish. That was my first job. I worked as a bench chemist, testing the sucrose content in sugar, and also rum samples, molasses samples, things like that.
Was that enjoyable work?
Well, yes, because it took me away from home, and I had my own independence in the sense that we used to work long hours, and we forged friendships with other workers, and we had our own money to spend. So yes, I did enjoy that.
So you touched on, by the way, what sort of age would you have been now, around 18, 19?
18.
Okay.
18.
You touched on independence there. What, apart from living away from home?
No, I was still at home.
Still at home.
But
Okay.
at least you've got your own pocket money. You could buy a bike, and you could buy nice clothes, and you could go out with girls. You could go to the cinema, and things like that.
Was politics at all a part of your early years, your years in nurturing, and now at the stage where you're working in a chemist?
Politics in my household then was, you could say, it's a taboo. Yes, they would vote, but there weren't any open political discussions. If there are politicians would come into the district to have a meeting, sometimes we would go. If it's the party that the family supports, then we would go and listen. But it wasn't a prominent issue within the family.
So how long were you in working at the chemist?
I worked as a chemist for a year, and then I left the country and went to Kingston. And I spent a couple of years in Kingston before I came to Britain.
What took you to Kingston?
I fell out with my immediate employer, and I walked out of the job. And after that, I felt that I wanted to go further, because there wasn't any job opportunities in the area that we were, and I realized that if I wanted to be independent, I had to move on. So I had a brother in Kingston who had just come out of the army, and I went and stayed with him for a while.
So that was your first time living away from home?
That was my first time living away from home.
And that's a contrast from the country to a city?
Yes, country boy, gone to town. Lots of freedom, lots of stresses, lots of challenges. But at the same time, I had friends who helped me to adopt. So it wasn't too bad.
How did you find, apart from all the things you've just said, living in Kingston? I mean, did you find, did it open up the world to you in a sense? From perhaps, coming from the country and now being in a bigger place that offers more opportunity. What did it inspire the future? Did it open up any?
Yes, there were lots more opportunities. But thinking back, yes, there were challenges, because in terms of accommodation, it was very limited. What we had was we just share a room together, which was quite small. So in terms of having that freedom to spread yourself out, it wasn't there. There wasn't any privacy as such. But having said that, I was still within the family unit, and I felt secure. I was earning. I think it took me about 3 months to get a job in Kingston. And that was with the post office. I began to work as a postman in Kingston. So, and that was a fairly secure and, lucrative job.
And you would have been about 19 at this age?
Yes, 19, yes.
So, what happened after that, after Kingston?
Well, while I've been in Kingston for a while, I realized that people were going to England in great numbers. And we had a family friend who had migrated. So I got in touch with my aunt in the country and said I would like to go to England. If she could get in touch with a friend and ask him to receive me. Anyway, they didn't like the idea, but I was very insistent. And in the end, I wrote to this friend and he said, yes, I could come along. He had received me. And that was 1960. Well, probably 1959 when I made the initial contact. But the conclusions were in 1960.
Why? What led you to? What led you to want to come to England and to write to your aunt? And what was the build up to that?
It was two things. One, I felt that I wasn't going anywhere fast. Secondly, I wanted to increase my my career prospects. So I had a great interest in accounting. And I felt that if I came to England, I'd have more chance in actually developing myself as an accountant. So those were the two driving forces that really, nudged me to want to come to England.
Did you have any sort of preconceptions about what England would be like in terms of culturally, what it would be like to live here? You had one other contact here, is that right?
Yes, but it's not somebody who actually corresponded with, because that person was much older than me. So it was just through my family who I made that contact. No, I must tell you, the only knowledge I have of England is what I was taught in school, because we did geography in school. And I know about lots of cold, we know lots of snow, but no, very little. I was ignorant. I was ignorant of the culture.
Okay, so in 1960, when things were finalised, what happened after that? When your papers and things were finalised for you to come to?
Well, when I decided to book my passage, firstly, I wanted to come on what they call the banana boat. And that was very impossible. Because when I checked that out, I says, look, one, it would cost you probably 5 times as much as if you travel on one of these passenger boats. Because it's only first-class passenger travel on these so-called banana boats. Secondly, sorry?
Could you just tell me before, what is a banana boat?
A banana boat is a boat that actually transports banana between Jamaica and Britain. Right. This been going on, I think it used to be done by a company called the West India Sugar Company. Right. So on these ships, they would have a limited number of facility for passengers. But these passengers are generally upper crust people who choose to travel that way because they use it as a cruise. Right. So they have, they're treated well while they're on those ships. So when I checked that out, I realized that yes, and then the opportunities to travel and those ships come very infrequent. I think you'd have to book probably 6 months or 12 months in advance to get on one. And I wanted to go now. So I decided to fly across. And when I decided to fly across, I realized that that would cost me even more as well. So what I did is to come on one of these passenger ships. The ship I came on was the SS Bigona. And that was a tourist ship. So I didn't come straight. It took me 4 weeks to reach Britain because that ship called at a number of Spanish resorts. I spent about 2 or 3 days in Tenerife. And we went to a place called Vigo. And then we went to a place called Santander. And I certainly enjoyed myself on the ship.
So after the 4-week journey here,
yes,
to here, what was the date you arrived?
I arrived in England. I remember it till the day I died. It was a Sunday, the 28th of June 1960, and we docked at Southampton, and then we caught a train to Victoria, and then another train to Wolverhampton.
So when you got to Southampton, what time of day was it? On a summer?
We got to Southampton about between 12 or 1 o'clock.
During the day?
During the day.
What were your first impressions of?
It was really foggy, pretty chilly, and all these chimneys were smoky, and we felt that there were lots of factories, not knowing that there were houses and businesses or whatever. So it was really strange, but we were among groups of people who were actually going to different areas, because I'd made friends with a number of people. Some were going to London, some were going to Birmingham, some were going to Manchester, while some probably were going to places like Huddersfield and Sheffield. So I came along to Wolverhampton with, I think, another 2 or 3 people.
Via Victoria?
Yes.
And then from Victoria?
To Wolverhampton, yes, yeah. I can't remember the exact time I arrived in Wolverhampton, but I remember it was at the low-level station, which is not in use now. And I went straight to an address in East Town called Grosvenor Street. I think it was 31 Grosvenor Street. That was my first.
How did you transport yourself from the station to?
We took a taxi. I took a taxi to the house in Grosvenor Street. I was just in time for Sunday afternoon meal.
So, what greeted you when you got there? I mean, you knew of this contact via your aunt?
Yes, well, as I say, I was much younger than him.
Yeah.
And he more or less rented a room from a friend, because in those days you just couldn't get accommodation. So you were very dependent on knowing a friend or knowing somebody who might be a householder. So we had to share a room in that house. So yeah, when I came along, there was another youngster in the house. I can't remember exactly his name. I think his name was Lloyd, and he was related to the owner of the house. So I shared the room with Lloyd. Yeah.
Just to take you back a little, prior to leaving Jamaica, was it what how many people did you have to say goodbye to, and was that difficult?
No, it wasn't difficult, because my immediate family in Kingston comprised of a brother, the older brother, and also an aunt called Aunt Floretta. She used to provide meals for us, and we'd pay her so much to provide meals for us. Thinking back now, the only person who came to the dock with me was my brother. Yeah, and we left late one evening, so I could just barely see him on the dockside while the boat was pulling away, and I can remember graphically seeing the boat pulling away and Jamaica going away from me, or me going away from Jamaica. Yeah.
Did you think you would see Jamaica again in your mind at that time?
Yes, I was very optimistic. Yes, and the idea then is that, the visit here would be fairly short. Once I get here and were able to better myself educationally, then I'd go back home. That was the initial plan.
So you mentioned your contact in Heathtown, where you first stayed. How long were you there?
We didn't stop in Heathtown too long, because when I got here, my friend got married, so we need more accommodation. And I can remember he bought a house in Proud Street off Kennock Road in Park Village.
You say we. Did this friend come with you from Jamaica?
No, I came to him.
Yeah.
So he got married,
right, okay.
And he needed greater facilities. So he bought a house in Proud Street, and he said, well, if you want, you can come with me. So I went to live in Proud Street, just off Kennock Road. And I lived at Proud Street for about a year and a half. And then I went to live with a friend in Larches Lane, just off Tetnall Road, Compton Road, yeah.
So what were you doing with yourself now that you were here in England? What were you doing for work? Maybe education?
Well, when I came, the first place they took me to was the employment office, which was in Railway Street. And when I got there, I can remember they gave me a card to take it to Goodyear's, to get a job at Goodyear's. However, the chap who would take me to the employment center said, no, don't go to the Goodyear's, no good down there. come on the buses. So I went to work with the local transport. I worked on the buses for about 3 years, 3.5 years.
As
Initially as a conductor, and they taught me to drive after, so I became a driver.
excuse me.
So I was able to drive the trolley buses, and then you progress to the motor buses, which was a bit more comfortable.
What years would these have been?
We're talking about 62, 63, because I started on the buses in 1960. But while I was on the buses, I developed some problems with my stomach, digestion. I was having problems digesting the meal properly. And I was advised that it was the shift work that was impacting on me. So I thought I would seek other employment that allowed me to eat at a more standard time. And I got a job with an engineering firm called Turner's Engineering in Upper Villiers Street.
Did you find it difficult to find work?
Well, not really. It's just that because you haven't got the skills. Because those days, a lot of the work was engineering, and because I was a bit choosy, it was easy to get down if you want to work down the pit, which is down mining coal. But that was a no for me. And jobs, you could get jobs, but they're quite menial. You weren't able to get jobs according to your educational ability. You just had to take what was given to you. So that limited my scope. But I felt engineering did provide me with some chances in the sense that I could read instruments. I was quite numerate, I was quite literate. So I didn't have any problems actually measuring and gauging items that you'd manufacture and things like that. So yes, I was quite happy to work in the factory.
During the time when you first arrived in the early 60s, were there many other people here from the Caribbean that you met?
Yes. I met up with quite a few people of my age and ilk who worked on the buses those days, and we used to have regular house parties, and the comradeship, our camaraderie was a lot greater than now, because we realized that we had to stick with each other, because in those days you had what they called teddy boys, who would go around in groups and attack blacks. So we tend to stick to each other, and we're quite closely knit. Yes, can remember that.
Did you experience anything direct from the Teddy Boys?
Yeah, indirectly, but I've never been set up on. I've had 1 or 2 attacks on the buses. I can remember one night I was working on Stole on Bradley. I don't know if you know the route, but I was the conductor then. And the last bus from Bilston by the clinic would be 11 o'clock up to Bradley Lane. And then most of the people would get on down Oxford Street. But those buses were quite small. So once you've taken on so many, you'd say, sorry, no more. So this night I said, sorry, no more. And just as the bus began to drive off, somebody chucked some mushy peas and other bits of food at me. And luckily I just stepped off to go in to collect the fares. So all this food was in the back of the bus. It was really strange. But yes, we used to get lots of aggro from passengers on the buses.
That incident, when the mushy peas were thrown, how did that make you feel?
Well, at the time, yes, you'd feel a little bit down and thinking that you're doing all this job and, people don't seem to appreciate you. But, in those days, it was part of the culture to be looked down on and to be ignored and to be harassed. So yes, I think we dealt with it quite well.
Just then you said in those days it was expected for white people to treat you like that. Did you accept it?
No, I've never accepted it, because I've never, believed, entertained the idea that I'm less than anybody. But some of it, yes, you'd put it down to part of the culture. Some people, I would say them to be totally ignorant, because what I found is that people who traveled were much more enlightened, and you could have a better discourse with them than people who just probably didn't even know Darliston and they might live in Bilston. That's what I found. So yes, I was quite perceptive to realize that it was down to ignorance.
And so does that mean you found it easy to deal with? Was it, or was it difficult to deal with?
It wasn't easy. At times, yes, it would affect you in terms of your confidence and in terms of your aspirations, because you couldn't get homes. The council wouldn't help you to get somewhere to live. If you even want to buy a place, you were limited where you could buy, or which house you could buy. That was one of the limitations. No matter how much money you had, as a black person, you weren't able to buy the property that you wanted.
How was this visible? I mean, how were you made aware of this?
It was quite visible in the sense that some people were quite explicit. They would say no blacks. You might, even some factories, most factories would have a notice board out front stating what vacancies they had. And some would go as far as to say no blacks. And then some again, if they don't even state it the moment you arrive, you know that you're not welcome.
So this is the era around the early 60s that we're talking about?
Yes, yes.
Earlier on you mentioned you and other people from the Caribbean used to hold house parties. Do you want to tell me a bit more about
Yeah.
what
Well,
like?
yes, these parties were. We had to organize ourselves to keep our sanity, and because basically Jamaicans are fun-loving people, and no matter where we are, we find ways of actually entertaining ourselves. So what we would do, we'd buy lots of records, Jamaican records, and we'd have sound systems, or probably might just have a little system in the house, and somebody would put the music on, and we would buy crates of beer. In those days, you couldn't get Red Stripe beer; it was tin beer, and we used to get some whiskey, which were American because there were still American soldiers in the area. So you'd be able to get cheap bottles of whiskey from the soldiers, and we'd have a jolly good time because somebody would do the food, and tonight you'll host the party, and probably tomorrow night I'll host it, and then it goes around the circle like that.
So this was generally amongst people of similar ages, or was there a big generation?
Yeah, it was well, in those days most of us were quite young. I mean, very few people here were mature, because it was the early days of migration. So most of the people around here were quite young.
So in terms of work, after earlier on you talked about working on the buses for about 3 years and then suffering from some digestive problems, and then you thought you'd seek some more 9-to-5 type work?
Yeah, that's why when I worked with Turner's Manufacturing.
Okay.
Yes.
And how long were you at Turner's?
I worked at Turner's for about 2 years, and then there were some problems with the production of the parts that we made. I think we were making parts for Ford, and there was a cutback, major cutback. So Turner's informed us that there were going to be redundancies. Well, naturally, from the moment he heard that, I didn't hang around. So I got a job at GKN on Cable Street of Bilston Road as a set operator. I used to work a long bed whippert, turning some very long bars, and they said those bars were for some catering machines. I don't know what they were for, but I did that for a while, and that didn't last too long. And then I worked for a company called British Leland down Park Lane. They used to own a factory in Park Lane. producing parts for lorries and buses, and I worked at a little lathe, yeah, making some massive nuts for trucks and buses.
Were there many other people from the Caribbean, the Indian subcontinent, working in the places of work that you worked in?
No, funnily, when I came here, there were very few Asian people here. Very few. Gradually, I think it was 64, 65 before we had any major influx of Asians. No, I just can't remember working with any Asian people in those early days.
What else was happening in your life around this?
Well, those early days, my life began to take off in a number of ways. One, I started to work towards my ambition. I began, while working at the bus, it was difficult to study. So what I did was to begin a correspondence course with the International Correspondence School, ICS. And secondly, I bought my first house in I'm trying to remember now. I think I bought my first house about 1964, which was quite early. But the reason why I had to do it, I started a family. So I had to provide for my family, and the opportunity arose. So I bought my first house then, and I changed a few jobs, because I changed from the buses to Turner. Then I left Turner's to GKN. Then I left GKN to the factory in Park Lane. And I can remember about 1967, I decided that I wanted something a little bit more testing. So I went to work for a same company called British Leyland, but this one was in Tipton. And I began to work a much larger machine, turning hubs for buses and trucks and things like that. But I did that for about 11 years. And while I was there, I did some work on a numerical control machine, machining cylinder heads, which I did for quite a few years. And I used to work nights. I did nights for about 7 years, all nights.
And how did you find that? I mean, compared to your experience doing shift work before on the buses, how did you find this?
Well, working nights, I got to like working nights because I was able to do quite a few things for myself during the days, because I developed my photographic skills, and I began to work semi-professionally as a photographer. I did numerous weddings, christenings, family photos and things like that. And I used to frame pictures. I used to sell some religious pictures, framed and unframed. So I built quite a sizable little business for myself during those days. So my income was enhanced doing those things, yes.
So how did you get involved in photography?
Very good question. When my first son was born, I wanted to take some pictures of him, christening, and somebody put me in touch with a local photographer. However, the end results weren't to my satisfaction. And I said to myself, I shall work to take better pictures than these. And that's what really kindled my interest in photography. And it grew and grew and grew till I got to a stage where I began to produce my own pictures, both color and black and white, because I set up a proper dark room and I would process them and frame them and things like that.
Earlier on you mentioned when you built your first house in 1964 because you were expecting a child. Could you talk about what led you to perhaps meet your wife?
Well, my wife's acquaintance was already made before I left Jamaica, right? So when I left Jamaica, you could say I left my girlfriend behind. And we got corresponding, you got here. The choice of women here was limited in that sense because there was very few black women here. So my wife followed quite shortly. Well, she wasn't my wife then, but my fiancée followed quite shortly after I came to England.
And where are we now in terms of dates with How many children did you have?
The union brought two children, two sons. The first one was born in 1963, and the second one was born in 1968, 5 years apart.
And you were still at your first house?
Yes.
And beyond that?
Well, after I've been in that house for about 9 years, I decided to sell that one, and I bought my second house, which I'm still in, about 1972.
And whereabouts is that in Wolverhampton?
Oak Street, off the Meredale Road.
And when you bought that second house, were there many other black families there or not? Or?
Yes, because Oak Street is one of the areas that most of the early settlers had settled. Yeah, it was regenerated in the sense that they had knocked down all the old houses and begun to build new houses. So I felt quite comfortable living in the area.
Throughout your time here, I know you came from, religion was part of your life back in Jamaica growing up. Were you able to pick up, in a sense, where you left off from in Jamaica, or are you still involved in religion? Have you been since you've been here?
Yeah, well, my what do you say, involvement in religious activities, I was brought up in Baptist. So when I came here, I began to go to the Baptist church in Waterloo Road, which is now knocked down. I think they've moved to Stafford Road. I think it's down 3 tons. Then I began to go to the one at up at the top here. Yeah, I went to the early church, one of the early black churches, which is now at down off the Willenhall Road. It's called Mount Shiloh, because they had the early church at a street called Nursery Street. All that is taken over now by the university. But I haven't joined the church as such. I do go to church, not very often. But that doesn't say I'm irreligious. It's just that I am not connected to any church.
Were your children brought up?
Yes, my wife is Adventist, so they were brought up more or less in Adventist. They used to go along with my wife to Adventist. She still goes.
Has it been at all difficult with your wife coming from an Adventist background and yourself coming from a Baptist background? I know you said you're not, actively involved necessarily, but has that been difficult with children? And
No, because I wasn't rigid in terms of what religion my children were brought up in. They had the freedom to go wherever. So it wasn't a problem. It has never been a problem.
Was there ever any pressure for you to convert or become more actively involved in perhaps the Seventh-day Church?
Yes, it had been suggested time and time again. Why not come to church? Why not join your wife at church? Yes. But as I said earlier on, I've always been strong-willed. So if I do go, it's because I want to go. It's not because somebody wants me to go. And that's how it remains.
So beyond the 70s, your children growing up, were they schooled locally?
Yes. Both boys, they studied at St. Jude's. And I think one went to Smithstow, but in terms of the schooling, yeah, there were problems, but they did fairly well. The eldest one, he went to Wolverhampton. It was the Poly then, and he got his degree in humanities. The last one, he didn't do too well, but I was able to encourage him to go back to college after I left school, and he's fairly well secure in a job with the local authority at the moment and continue to upgrade himself. So they haven't done too badly.
I mean, has it been difficult bringing up children? I mean, I know you haven't brought up children in Jamaica, but coming from Jamaica, another culture, has it been difficult bringing up children?
Yes. Yes. One, it was difficult in the sense that I didn't have secure employment, and that's always a pressure, knowing that you've got a family who is dependent on you, and you're hopping from one job to the other. The only good thing is that jobs were easy to get. But in terms of my earning ability, that was very limited in terms of the amount you were able to earn. So that's why I had to supplement my income by doing photography and other ancillaries.
Do you have any regrets of coming to Wolverhampton, of coming to Britain?
No regrets of coming to Britain, because it has certainly, broadened my horizon. I've learned lots of new skills. I've got a wealth of experience, and I've been able to meet a diverse range of people. So I've got no regrets as such. Sometimes I do regret coming to Wolverhampton, especially when I go to other areas and see people a little bit more, aspiring. Then I feel that probably Wolverhampton was a mistake. But yeah, nothing major.
Like where else is more inspiring?
London, because I did have the choice. While I was coming up from Jamaica on the ship, one or two people says, don't go to Wolverhampton, come to London with us, But because I already made this arrangement and because my family was part of the arrangement, then I decided and came to Wolverhampton. But yes, yes, I've seen people done better in other areas. London, Nottingham, and probably parts of Manchester and Bristol, because I've got one or two friends in those areas. You tend to compare. I don't know if the area has really got much to do with it, but probably it's the sort of employment, that choices that you have then.
What do you think your own personal contribution has been to Wolverhampton?
Well, I think my personal contribution is mainly in the area of community development. I've always been involved in equality work. I've been involved with the local REC from the early 70s. I've always been involved with local community organizations, and I've always been involved in local issues and concerns around good community relations, and also the betterment of all people in terms of equality of opportunity and justice in general for everyone.
What do you predict for the future of a place like Wolverhampton? How are things going to shape out?
Yeah, it's hard to say. What will may have a major impact is that young people are developing quite fast. They are becoming more educated. They are becoming more articulate, and because of that, then I can only believe that the future holds good for better, aspirations, and for people to be able to participate equally. Because as long as we continue to challenge inequality and work towards better relationship and understanding of different cultures, then things can only get better.
Dennis Brown, I'd like to thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I hope you'll be able to use some of what I've said.
If you go to sing, please.
6, 5, 4, 3.
Yes, there was one or two areas that we'd like to cover, and those were, if you'd like to elaborate for me, please.
Yes, after I worked in the factories for some time, I felt that I wanted to change my career. And my early involvement with the REC and the CRE, because in those days the CRE used to provide a lot of development programs for community activists like myself, and I did really take those opportunities on board in terms of development, management development, being able to manage projects, being able to develop community organizations and other training, probably training people to become trainers and to generally empower people to play a part within the community. And I found that very useful. And because of my involvement in those early training initiatives, I was able to change my career, and I applied for a job with a local organization as a project manager, and I was successful, and I was able to move from the factory into management.
What was the name of the organisation?
It was, in those days, it was called West Midlands Caribbean Association, and they used to run projects around electronics, photography, and things like that, and I felt that I could contribute to that. We also managed a project that catered for unemployed young men, and we'd have various properties within the borough that would provide that facility. So there was quite a diverse range of activities that took place.
What sort of era and what date?
We're talking about 1984, 1984. Then I worked at the Cultural Centre as its director from about 1984. And while I was there, I had to do some research into looking to setting up an African Caribbean restaurant. And while doing the research, I realized that my abilities did not match the responsibilities. And I was very, very dependent on an officer from the local authority. And while doing that, I said to myself, I will learn how to do these things properly.
When you say these things, you mean research?
Research and I had to develop a business plan.
Okay.
And other, things like that. And I didn't feel comfortable. I wasn't able to deliver as I would have liked. And I decided to go back to college. And I did my O-levels some years previous at the Wolfram College. So having done my O-levels, I went and approached the Polytechnic to see if they would look at me as a potential candidate for higher education. And fortunately, they said yes. And I undertook my part-time degree in business studies and was successful in getting my honours, which took me about 5 years to complete.
So from about 84 to 89 or?
90. 90. So I think I began at about 85, so about 90 when I graduated at the Poly.
And was that difficult at that time in life?
It was difficult in the sense that I didn't have any support, and working full-time and doing the course as a part-time basis. I would leave work at 4 o'clock and my first lecture would be at 6, and I was working in Birmingham then, so it was just enough to get across from Birmingham and to get to Compton site to have my first lecture. So yes, it was very, very demanding in terms of, and the fact that I didn't have anybody within the household to provide me with support after I leave the college environment. So I found that very, very demanding. And at times, I thought about giving it up, but then I was very, very determined to succeed.
What were you expecting at the end, apart from degree? Apart from what were you expecting at the end?
Well, my early training in terms of entrepreneurship, I had done quite a bit in those areas. As I said before, I was trading as a semi-professional photographer. I used to do lots of areas around, activities around that in terms of framing pictures, selling my services and things like that. So I know what it is to actually to trade. And so I had that leaning, and I wanted to develop those skills in terms of being able to manage a business and to fashion a business. So I had that early inkling and early ambition to be able to manage a business.
And so, what happened after having completed a degree?
Well, once I've completed my degree, then I could apply for better paid positions, and I was able to use my skills to help people in the organizations that I I am part of, like the one that I'm here now. I was able to do quite a number of funding bids which were successful. I was able to set up steering groups and to actually manage projects and provide proper accountability for them.
So you're still connected to?
Yes, at the moment, this organization, I've been its chairman, I've been its secretary, I've been its treasurer.
Could you just, for the sake of, what is this organisation called now?
This is now called West Midlands Caribbean Parents and Friends Association, which is one of the oldest black organizations in Wolverhampton. I think this was set up in the 50s, about 1958. So it's way back. At the moment, we manage 2 projects, which is very, very active in the community in terms of its involvement with young people, parents. We do some work with the prisons called Prison Link, where we organize volunteer prison visits. So in terms of community development, community involvement, yes, we are well placed, and at the moment we're quite active in those areas.
Is there anything else?
Yes, I think I would like to say a little bit about my involvement with race work and my gratitude to the CRE for those early programs, because without those sort of measures, most probably I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have the skills and abilities and the confidence that I've developed over the years. So I'd like to say thanks to the CRE.
Finally, where are you today? Because you are still a working man, is that right?
Yes, at the moment I manage a project in Dudley, which manage SRB activities. We do a lot of personal development training. We also organize work experience training. We run a facility called Learning Center, which provide ICT activities for local people. And we do a lot in terms of lifelong learning to enable people to participate in whatever the choice is, and to combat social exclusion in general.